Gustavo Neri with AB Boxing News. We're here with the mastermind, the intelligent Eric Bischoff. Welcome to WrestleCon. How's New York treating you at the moment?
New York always treats me really, really well. I don't think it's me. I think New York generally treats everybody pretty damn well.
Just before we talk about a little bit of boxing and wrestling, I know you have a book out there. Can you just tell the fans a little bit about the book, what's about, and why they should purchase it?
Well, the book came out about 2007, made the New York Times bestseller list. It's really about the business of the wrestling business, as well as some of the bigger moments and the tactics and strategy that I use to compete with WWF or WWE. So it's really about the business of the wrestling business and my career in it.
The key word that I appreciate that you just said was the business, right? Back in the 90s, it seems like wrestling was at its prime and its elite, where ratings were battling back and forth. And it seems like now it hasn't really been that competition lately. But do you feel like it's going to be a resurgence down the road, maybe in a couple of years?
I think it could be. I mean, if you look at, for example, AEW, which is a new wrestling company that's just getting started, very well funded, some very smart people associated with it. I think that if they make a long-term commitment to the business and have moderate success starting out, I think there's a good chance that we could see some amazing things happen in the future.
There was a big news coming out a couple of days ago with Conor McGregor retiring for UFC. We don't know if he retired or not, but a lot of the fans say that Conor McGregor is a perfect candidate to transition to, let's say, wrestling, particularly WWE, due to his promos, or probably come back to boxing for another fight with Mayweather. What's your perspective on his next transition to his career?
I don't see him in WWE. First of all, he's a very small guy, and that works in MMA and it works in boxing. But for anybody, especially a male, to be in there and competing with some of the bigger guys in WWE would be a difficult thing, I think, for the audience to accept long term. You could do it, one-off here or a special, but long term, I don't see it. That's one issue. The other issue is I don't think he's made for it mentally or emotionally. We've seen a lot, some of the comments that he's been saying in, social media, he steps over the line, and people look at professional wrestling and they think it's over the top, and, and it is in so many respects, but there's a line you still can't cross, even in wrestling. And I'm not sure Conor, I'm not sure where his head at. To me, he doesn't seem like a real stable person. He may be a great fighter, but I think emotionally, if you just look at some of the things that he's been involved with recently and the way he conducts himself in the press, I think he's a little immature or irresponsible, and probably too immature or too irresponsible to have any kind of a long-term relationship with WWE, which is a publicly held company and it's run like a business.
Now we're going to transition a little bit to boxing. Are you familiar with the sport of boxing? Is there a particular fighter you like, or maybe an era that you like in boxing?
Well, I'm 64 years old, and I grew up. Listen, I remember, I grew up in Detroit and listening to, Cassius Clay fights on the radio because they weren't televised. Ultimately, I became pretty good friends with Muhammad and actually traveled to North Korea with him back in 1995. So, when people talk about boxing to me, the first thing I remember is the 60s and the 70s and Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, certainly. Sugar Ray Leonard was a fun one for me to watch. I've always loved boxing, the sport of boxing. I would like to see it come back to more of its heyday. I don't know that it ever will, because the world has changed and sports have changed. But, I love the art and the science of boxing, and I miss watching it.
Knowing that you had some great success and you still continue to have great success in wrestling, was that something maybe in your mind in terms of boxing, in terms of maybe being an advisor, a manager, or even a promoter in boxing? Was that ever cross your mind?
No, it's a different world, okay. and I'm aware enough of my own limitations and skills to know that just because you're good at one thing doesn't necessarily mean you'd be good at another. And boxing is a very complex world and a very complex culture. So I think it would be tough. I'm just a fan. I'm happy just being a fan.
In terms of network supremacy, we just talked about a couple minutes ago in terms of ratings and wrestling, boxing seems like is also making a transition where a lot of networks such as ESPN, DAZN, Fox, Showtime are making heavy investments in boxing and their fighters. But one of the flaws could be that with fighters signing exclusive deals with certain networks, it prevents from the big fights of happening. If you was to give advice Is having too much networks invested in one sport bad for the sport of boxing or good?
It's not as simple as is it good or is it bad. It's more complex than that. I think overall it's a good thing. If you've got networks and investing large amounts of money in any sport, that's always a good thing. Now, in terms of how does it grow, you know, what happens 3 or 4 or 5 years from now if all of a sudden there are really popular boxers that are tied up in exclusive contracts and a fight can't be made, that's an unfortunate situation, but that's the kind of situation you hope to have. You hope to be faced with that kind of a problem where you've got 2 amazingly popular fighters that the world wants to see fight. They'll find a way to work through the contract issues.
Thank you. Where can we follow you? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Mr. Bischoff?
You can follow me on Twitter at ebischoff and on Instagram at the Eric Bischoff.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Eric Bischoff. Hope to see you soon. Enjoy New York and hope to see you soon. Thank you again. What a pleasure. Thank you.
My friend.
Thank you.